Morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, let me share the screen. We're going to continue on this Aruch HaShulchan today so that we can get a better understanding of the halacha that we learned yesterday, that when you find a coat in the coat room of a Shiva house or of a Simcha, and it's not yours and your coat is missing, you're not allowed to wear that coat. Okay, that's what we saw yesterday. Okay. So I said, I want us to look at the Aruch HaShulchan because he addresses this halacha in two parts. The first part, he's really quoting from the Shulchan Aruch, but the two parts are, if you go to a store, like the tailor or the dry cleaner, and they give you the wrong item, are you allowed to keep it or not? So the first thing that we saw yesterday, we had just started this halacha in Sif Aleph, and you go to the dry cleaner or to the tailor to pick up the article of clothing that you had brought in to be cleaned or had brought in to be fixed, okay? And so you're allowed to keep it, even though it's not the garment that he gave you, that you gave him. He says the reason is because you're the talinan, he said in the third line, Shema Adam Acher Nasan Taliso Okelav Lehauman. We assume that another person had given his garment to the professional on consignment, Lamochran, Vita Hauman Umachar Shalzeh Bimakoma. And the shopkeeper made a mistake, and he sold your garment instead of the other garment that he had received on consignment. And when you come back to the store and you want to get your garment, the shopkeeper realizes he made a mistake. And so we assume that he's knowingly giving you the other garment that was given to him to sell on consignment. And therefore, there's no improper usage of this garment because essentially it's a swap. In other words, he was instructed to sell a garment from another customer. He accidentally sold your garment, so he's giving you this garment in exchange. He says, now, don't ask me the question. Maybe you wouldn't be allowed to use the garment because v'halo im lo yisratza halokech betaliso shalzeh kishiyach lifenu halo yachol lahachzir lo hatalis. He says, but one second, what if the buyer that he sold my talis to, right, isn't happy with it, and he's going to ask for his money back? And then it turns out that I'm going to be using this talis inappropriately because really it has to be given back. He says we're not concerned about that because we assume that once the seller got his money, even if afterwards perhaps the person who bought my talis may want his money back and may come and return it, but nevertheless, the person who gave up his garment on consignment is at least able to use the money temporarily, and he's totally fine with it. So the point is that the Aruch HaShulchan is making is that it's totally fine in a case where you can make an assumption like this, that the storekeeper knowingly is giving you not the garment that you gave to him, but he's giving it to you because he messed up and he wants to make good. So he gives you a comparable garment to the one that you gave him. And in the meantime, he sold your garment and gave the money to the person who had actually given him this garment to sell. Now, the dafka shenasna lohu uman ba'atzmo, duhu kamo shulucho shel hamocher. V'havi hashimush kamo midaito shel hamocher. But now he qualifies it. He says this halacha is only true if it's the shopkeeper himself who received the other garment on consignment, if he gives you that garment. Okay? Because we assume that he's acting as a proxy of the fellow who needed to sell this garment. Aval im nasno lo ishto uvanav lo yishtamesh ba. But if an employee, such as the wife or the children, or an employee of the shopkeeper gives you the garment, then you may not use it. She'ein lahem reshus litein lihishtamesh bo. He says, because they don't have permission to take the garment that was given on consignment and to give it away without making sure, without checking with the boss. Now, because in the event that they're making a mistake, they may be making a mistake and giving you the wrong garment. Now, vafilu ha'uman atzmo dafka kishamar lehelach talis stam debazet talinan kemoshe kasavti. He says, and furthermore, you're only allowed to keep the garment for yourself and wear it if the shopkeeper said, take this garment. Aval im omar lehelach talitcha o kelecha asur lihishtamesh bo. But if he says, hello, my dear sir, here is your garment. We cleaned it for you, and it's as good as new, much better than when you brought it here. So then from his words, it's clear that he's making a mistake. He says, Denira shita, because then you can no longer assume that he knows what he's doing by giving you the wrong garment. And then you would not be allowed to use the garment if it's clear that the guy made a mistake. And I would say that in the modern world, where a dry cleaner or a tailor would never be allowed to do this. I mean, it's probably against the law to do what the Aruch HaShulchan is describing, to basically deceive, not say anything to a customer and say, oh, sure, yeah, you brought me a garment in last week. Yes, of course. Here, take this. Now, even if he says take this and he doesn't say here's your garment, it would probably still be against the law for him to give you a different garment. You could probably sue him in court. So I don't think that this halacha really applies, that to give you permission to use it with the assumption that he's giving you knowingly another garment. But he says, Ve'ima tala shenasan lahu uman shava yoser mitaluso haberera biyado o litein labal hatalis esa odeif. He says, if the talis that the shopkeeper gives you back in return is worth more than the garment that you had given him last week, so then you have the choice. You can either give the original owner the overvalue that you're getting from this new garment, or taliso, or to return the garment, and for the shopkeeper to pay you. V'yitva es ha'uman shiachzer lahakona ma'osav v'yikabel talisa. And you can demand from the shopkeeper, give the guy back his garment, and shiachzer lahakona ma'osav v'yikabel talisa. So in other words, you can tell the shopkeeper that give the extra money to the the guy who bought my garment, give him back his money and get my garment back. The imtaliso shava yoser, and if your garment is worth more than the one that he's trying to give you, yachal lekabel ha'odef mibal hatalis or lebatel hamechira, then you can nullify the sale or get the extra amount. V'im yavo bal hatalis v'yomar. And if the original garment owner says, I never authorized the shopkeeper to sell my garment, and he didn't give me any money, then he can go directly to you, the customer, and ask you for the garment back. as long as he provides witnesses that it's his garment. Oh, she'itain siman al hatala sheshelo, or he can give a siman to prove that it's his. Because even though we can assume, if we don't have any information, that the garment that the shopkeeper gave you was given on consignment, but if the owner comes and tells you, I didn't give it to him on consignment, he really messed up, then he certainly believed. Af below shvua, even without having to take an oath. And then you'll have to go back to the shopkeeper and have him make good on it. And in that instance, if the guy comes and says, hey, I just discovered that you picked up my garment instead of picking up your garment, even if the shopkeeper doesn't have your garment, you still have to surrender the mistaken garment that is in your possession. And then if you go back to the shopkeeper and the shopkeeper contradicts the guy who came to you, so then, there's going to have to be a din Torah. That's essentially what the Aruch HaShulchan says. So this is all, this halacha that we've seen so far is all when you go to a storekeeper, you had given to the dry cleaner your coat. He gives you the wrong coat. You take it home. You discover it's the wrong coat. So in the first part of the halacha, he says that in certain instances where the dry cleaner has permission to sell other people's garments, it's possible that he sold your garment and is giving this to you genuinely in exchange for it. So then that's one scenario. That's unlikely to occur in today's world. And so, but what's more likely to be the case is that he made a mistake, and you're going to have to go back to the store and bring it back, and then you would not be allowed to use it until everything gets straightened out. And that brings us to Sif Beis, which is the second halacha in this two halacha siman. That if your coat gets exchanged or swapped in a shiva house or in a social hall or in someone's house for a sheva brachas or in a synagogue or any other kind of place where people will bring their coats. Kagon shalokach kelev o chafetzav v'ra'a achar kach she'inam shalo. Right? So you pick up someone else's object, someone else's garment, you realize it's not yours. Lo yishtamesh bahem. You may not use it. V'lo talinan debal hachefetz natale shelo mishtamesh bahu v'yishtamesh kamhu b'chefetz zeh. And we don't make any permissible assumptions that the guy whose coat you took has your coat and he's using your coat, so you might as well use his coat. He says, we don't make such an assumption over here, as we did in the previous halacha with the shopkeeper. He says, because in the previous case, the shopkeeper was very careful with his language. He said, here, take this. And he didn't say, here's your garment, sir. So because his language sort of indicates that he's hedging his bets, it's an indication that he knowingly gave you a garment that did not belong to you. But when we know for sure that there was a mistake made, and the guy who took your coat thought it was his coat, and he left his coat, lo amrinan came. We don't say that. Because first of all, we don't even know. Maybe the owner of this coat that I have in my possession now didn't take my coat. Maybe someone else took my coat. Maybe my coat got stolen. Who knows? And even if he ended up taking my coat, maybe he's not interested in using it in the interim. And therefore, when the owner of this coat that I took home, that I now find in the coat room, when he comes to retrieve his garment, you have to surrender it to him, even though your own coat was lost. And the same thing will be true by, let's say, a woman who runs a laundromat. or not a laundromat, but a laundry service, and she was washing clothes for a bunch of people. And she brings out to a person clothing that does not belong to him. So she brings me my clothing, and I realize that the package of clothing that she brings me is not mine. I'm not allowed to use them. I have to make sure that they get back to their real owner, even if my clothing turns out to be totally lost. And the general rule is that Reuven cannot withhold Shimon's property just because Reuven's property was lost. Because why should Shimon have to suffer just because Reuven's items were lost? It's not Shimon's fault that Reuven's items were lost. And so therefore, there's no reason for Reuven to say, well, when I get my stuff back, I'll give you your stuff back. That's not fair. Now, in a situation where it's been many days and the owner has not shown up to retrieve the package of garments that I have of his, then it's possible, and the laundry woman has not contacted me, it's very possible that they've given up hope of ever retrieving their clothing. Or it's possible that the laundry lady paid the guy whose clothing she gave me, compensated him for his loss. Or maybe she deliberately gave me a package of clothing that doesn't belong to anybody. Maybe it belongs to her. And she gave me this package because she actually lost my clothes. And she's too embarrassed to tell me that she lost my stuff. So she just gathered a bunch of clothes and gave it to me instead. Now, the last thing that the Aruch HaShulchan writes, and this is really the key, he says, the minhag, he writes, in today's world, where you have large gatherings of people, and people leave their outer garments, or let's say their outer shoes, for example, their galoshes, and they leave it in a lobby. And then when they leave, what they do is they typically will just take the first pair of galoshes that they can find. Ein makpidin bedavar. Then people don't mind if their galoshes get swapped. Umishhtamish kol echad b'shel chaveiro, and therefore everyone is allowed to use their friend's items ad sheyisro panim umachlifim esatzmam, until they meet again, and then they can make the proper swap. Ve'ein bazech shash gezela, and there's no fear about theft, shekach nahavu, because that's the minhag. That's the minhag. So he says this about min alayim ha'elyonim, outer shoes, meaning boots or galoshes. He says, in that situation, there's no problem of you using someone else's galoshes, or outer shoes, because that's the minhag that's accepted within our social convention, he writes.
Rabbi, maybe they're like a one size thing, so each one is interchangeable with the next.
Correct. So I'm going to ask you a question. What would you say? What is our social convention? Do we have a social convention? If your coat gets taken by somebody else, is it your feeling that nobody minds today? Do you really feel that are we able to make such an assumption?
I was wondering about this through all of our discussion about how we say, if it's a Torah item like a siddur or a talus or something like that, we're happy if someone else uses it. And if it's the only coat there and someone's going to freeze to death if they don't borrow your coat, I don't think anyone would mind if the coat gets borrowed. But I don't know.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point, Paul, as far as, a Torah artifact. I'm allowed to, if I need a pair of tefillin and I find one in the shul, we learned the halacha that you're allowed to put on someone else's tefillin, as long as you wrap it up nicely, put it away nicely, and you're done with it quickly, right? So because there we assume that someone else wants you to use their items to do a mitzvah. Can you make the same assumption that someone doesn't want you to freeze to death, so they'd like you to use their coat? It's a good argument. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think that it's 100% exactly the same. But it seems quite clear from this halach in Shulchan Aruch that under just regular circumstances, you're not allowed to make these assumptions. I mean, first of all, let me ask you, right? Would it make a difference between Shabbos and a regular day? On a regular day, if you go to the coat room and your coat is missing and this is the only coat left, can you assume that the guy would want you to wear the coat so that you can get from the door of the building to your car, when it's cold? I mean, maybe his attitude is, it's a cashmere coat. I paid a lot of money for it. It's a designer coat, especially when the coat that he left is more valuable than the one that you left and he took yours instead. Maybe his attitude is, I don't want people to wear my coat. So what? So you'll just walk to your car and you'll get in and you'll turn on the heater. What's the big deal? Versus on Shabbos, where it's really, really cold, maybe he would want you to wear his coat. It's a little bit unclear to me. And that's why I wanted us to see the Aruch HaShulchan. He only provides wiggle room when you can make an assumption that there is a desire of the person whose coat is left, that he knowingly left it there and he wants me to use it. So there's a very good chance, in fact, that the person who took my coat isn't even yet aware that he took the wrong coat, which happens quite a lot. And so the reason why I wanted us to see this is because the Imrei Yaakov quotes this Aruch HaShulchan, and
I might suggest, particularly if they're identical, like we're talking about with the galoshes, like if, those flimsy black raincoats that are all the same.
Right.
And there's only one left, and you can see someone else's name is in it, so it's not yours. But you're pretty sure that the other person took it because they thought they took their own and they probably wouldn't care. That sounds more like the boot situation.
Right. Correct. So if you take a look in the Biurim over here, he's going to quote the Aruch HaShulchan. So he quotes the Aruch HaShulchan about the galoshes. He says, "Ela delafi ta'amo v'nimuko ein lanu heter rak ba'ofan shehizkir." He says, according to the argument that he provides the Aruch HaShulchan, is that this heter of being allowed to use the other guy's galoshes is only in that kind of scenario, da'inu b'makom sheyesh minhag barur shederech b'nei adam lahachali v'tamin alayim ha'elyonim ve'ein makpidim al hachlafatam, that where it's already known. Oh, it's like, oh, you got someone else's galoshes. Don't worry about it. We all do. This is Canada, and in Canada we all wear each other's clothes. I don't think that's the custom here, to be honest. The Bisha shahorid isnalo ha'elyon beprozdar kvar yada shebetzeiso olu limso acherim umitchila machal al zeh. He says, it sounds like from the Aruch HaShulchan that as soon as you take off your galoshes and leave them in the lobby, or whatever this area is, this coat room is, you know that there's a very good possibility that someone else will take your galoshes, and you're already moichel. You already are forgiving at the moment you leave your outer shoes there. Ve'ein lo kepeda sharei kach nagu, and you don't mind because that's already a long-standing custom. Va'afilu im lo nasan daito al ze mitchila behedja, and even if you didn't consciously think about this when you took off your galoshes, mikol makom kevin denagu kain mistaber dein baze isur, but since it's already a convention in your community, there's nothing wrong with it. Ve'al kol panim ein lachu shemeyakbid al zeh. He says, and therefore you don't have to worry that when you take the other guy's galoshes, he's going to be upset. Ach kol zeh bistama. But that's already, but this is all when, when there's no other indication as to what the other guy's attitude is going to be. Aval im gila daito behedje shehu makpid nira dibazeh ein lahatir. But let's say the guy puts a label in his galoshes saying, property of Yankel Schwartz, please do not use. So in that situation, there's no way that you can permit it. He says, and the Tosfos says that if you steal stuff that normal people don't mind, let's say a guy normally keeps, he puts wood in front of his property because he's got a forest in the back, and he piles up wood in the front of his property. And normally people don't mind when they have so much wood; they don't mind if other people come and take it. But if you know that the guy doesn't want people to take it, says firewood do not touch, right? Then and you go ahead and take it, so then you're invalid for being a witness because you're considered to be a ganav. The kavanasam da'af b'davar she'ein acher makpidim. And what we learn from there is that in situations where normal people don't mind if some people take this item from them, but if you clearly indicate that you don't want people taking this item or using your item, then that wish has to be honored. He says, and certainly, if the convention is for people to not want their items to be used without permission, so then you can't rely on the heter of the Aruch HaShulchan. Umikoach divrei ha'Aruch HaShulchan, adayin ein lanu smach lahatir, heicha din schalfu begada bebeis ha'mishta bebeis ha'knesses uchedome. He says, and even therefore with the heter of the Aruch HaShulchan, we still don't yet have a heter to rely upon when you go to the coat room and you find someone else's coat. Because there is no accepted convention in our society today that says that you can go ahead and wear the other guy's coat. But I still want to be able to find a heter, he says, because this bothers me. Because really, at the end of the day, what are you going to do? It's freezing outside, and what are you going to do if there's no other coat? And so there's like a mitzvah to find a heter. And I'm just thinking to myself, maybe it would be helpful for us to put up a sign in the coat room saying that if someone accidentally takes your coat, permission is hereby granted for the other person to take the coat that is left. And when a person sees the sign and they hang up their coat, maybe that would be enough to consider that to be creating the convention. I'm wondering, has anyone ever seen a sign like that in a coat room? I've never seen a sign like that.
No, the only signs I've ever seen are the Hefker signs after 30 days. But other than that, I haven't seen that. That makes sense. I mean, maybe we'd say they have the permission to borrow your coat rather than take it, right? Because, I mean, on the understanding that they'll use it that time and then bring it back.
Right. Okay. So before we launch into this study that the Aruch HaShulchan, that the Biurim, that the Imrei Yaakov is going to try and tell us, since we're out of time, we'll have to leave it here, and we'll come revisit this on Monday. So just a reminder: on Monday we'll meet at approximately 7:05, and we'll be able to learn for about 25 minutes. Okay, everybody. So let me wish you all a good Shabbos. And everyone, I hope everyone is well. Try not to get wet outside. Sounds pretty rainy outside today.
So we get an extra long weekend.
An extra long, yeah, you get an extra half hour. That's right.
Indeed.
Okay.
Take care.